Okay, let's dive into this. There's this really shocking story coming out of New York City. Ryan Hemphill, a private equity executive, facing just a massive number of charges, 116 criminal counts.
Yeah, 116.
Yeah.
And the details.
Yeah.
They're horrifying. Prosecutors are calling his apartment a, quote, torture chamber.
Exactly. We're talking accusations of rape, assault, apparently with things like cattle prods, shock collars. It's awful stuff, and claims he recorded these alleged acts.
And the scale, like you said, 116 charges.
Yeah.
It's hard to even process.
Plus, there's the whole layer of how he reportedly met the women, these sugar daddy sites, and then the accusations of not paying them or even using, like, fake money.
It really is this disturbing mix, isn't it? You've got these incredibly violent personal allegations, but then it immediately raises bigger questions about power, finance, how the justice system in a place like Manhattan even deals with this level of accusation.
Right. It's more than just a crime story. A listener actually asked us to dig into this, to try and understand, what it all means beyond just the headlines.
So that's our plan for this deep dive. We've pulled together a few key sources. There are the news reports, obviously, detailing the allegations against Hemphill.
Yep. We've also got info straight from the Manhattan DA's office, explaining their typical criminal justice process, just the nuts and bolts.
And then, maybe a bit unexpectedly, there's this research paper we found. It looks at private equity investment in gun stores and links it to violent crime. Seems unrelated first glance, but...
But maybe there's a connection.
Yeah.
That's the mission, right? To see if we can connect these dots. Understand the power dynamics in the Hemphill case itself, see how the Manhattan system is supposed to work, and then explore if this gun retail research shines any light on, broader issues around finance, power, regulation.
Exactly. Moving past just the shock value to see what underlying forces might be at play.
Okay, so let's start with Hemphill himself. The specifics of the allegations. He's identified as, a private equity guy, financier, but also an attorney.
Right, that attorney background becomes relevant later.
Reports say he met these women online, including those sugar daddy type sites, apparently promised them, significant money for companionship.
But the first alleged betrayal is right there. Prosecutors claim he often didn't pay what was agreed or sometimes used counterfeit cash.
So right away, that promise of money, it sets up this power imbalance, doesn't it? One person clearly has more leverage.
And then not delivering on that promise, it introduces alleged deceit, exploitation right from the get-go. Sort of a pattern of leveraging that advantage that seems to, unfortunately, continue.
And it reportedly escalates quickly. The allegations move into serious intimidation threats.
Using that lawyer status, apparently.
Yeah, trying to scare women off from reporting. Claims he sent threatening texts, bragged about connections like law enforcement, even organized crime to keep them quiet.
Wow.
Even apparently tried to flip it, suggesting the women would get arrested for taking money. It's this alleged use of his professional standing, his supposed connections. Just a really disturbing control tactic.
That threat of legal trouble, especially when you add in claims of knowing people in the police, that can be incredibly powerful in silencing someone. It suggests maybe a belief he could operate above the law.
Then we get to the really, really horrific physical stuff. The alleged control, the torture.
This is where it gets extremely graphic.
Accusations of using handcuffs, other restraints, duct tape over heads and faces. One woman allegedly shackled to a bed for hours.
And the torture implements. The cattle prod, the shock collar. These are specific allegations.
Prosecutors also mentioned threats with guns and knives. And investigators apparently found hundreds of bullets, high-capacity magazines in his apartment.
That detail about the ammunition, it really underscores the potential for extreme violence.
And he's accused of drugging victims, too, allegedly making them unable to resist. The use of all these things, restraints, weapons, drugs, it points towards this, calculated effort to dominate and inflict extreme pain.
It's a deeply disturbing picture of alleged physical control, intentional suffering.
And it wasn't just physical, apparently. There are allegations of psychological manipulation, too.
How so?
Getting women to share past sexual traumas and then allegedly reenacting those traumas during the assault.
Well, that's profoundly cruel.
Also accused of exploiting victims' inexperience or just ignoring boundaries they'd clearly set. It suggests this complete lack of empathy, using vulnerabilities to cause even more harm.
Deliberately reenacting trauma. If that's true, it's just calculated cruelty on another level. Maximum psychological distress alongside the physical stuff. Real premeditation.
And then the alleged efforts to make sure nobody talked. to stop them reporting.
Right, to cover up attempts.
Forcing some women, allegedly, to record videos saying everything was consensual.
Wow. Coerced statements.
And he's actually facing charges for bribing a witness. Apparently even drafted a contract offering $2,000 for a woman to drop a police complaint.
A contract? Unbelievable.
There's even one chilling report, him allegedly telling a woman, "Don't bother reporting, I know half the precinct."
That kind of boast just reinforces that alleged belief he could get away with anything. Obstruction of justice, witness tampering, serious charges on top of everything else.
Yeah, it points to this potential impunity complex, makes you question the systems meant to protect people.
Definitely.
And finally, there's the whole surveillance aspect. His apartment supposedly had cameras everywhere.
And he kept recordings.
Allegedly kept recordings of the assaults, like trophies, prosecutors said. Investigators apparently found images of maybe hundreds of other women on these cameras.
Hundreds? Wow. That suggests the scope could be much, much wider. And keeping recordings as trophies, that's particularly chilling. It suggests the pattern, maybe a desire to relive it. Huge challenge for investigators, too.
We heard from Assistant DA Myra Kurtzer. She called the alleged conduct truly shocking to the conscience, said he has no regard for the law or the courts.
Strong words from the prosecution.
And DA Bragg himself talked about the power imbalance, Hemphill using his law degree and money as both sword and shields, coercing and silencing survivors.
That sword and shield analogy is powerful.
Even the judge seemed concerned, worried about flight risk because of his wealth, his connections, philanthropy, real estate, that kind of thing, which led to him being held without bail.
And that's a really significant decision by the judge. Holding someone without bail, especially someone with resources, it shows the court sees a serious risk, either flight or danger to the community, given the charges.
Okay, so that's the horrifying backdrop. Now let's look at the system's response. How does the Manhattan criminal justice system typically handle cases like this? Our info from the DA's office lays out the standard procedure after an arrest.
Right. It usually starts, obviously, with the police investigation if they believe they have probable cause.
Which is? Just refresh us.
Basically, a reasonable belief that a crime happened and this person did it. Enough to make an arrest. Then you get the usual stuff.
Yeah.
ID procedures, maybe the accused makes a statement, searching for evidence, seizing it.
Fingerprints, reports, the standard police work.
Exactly. Gathering all that initial info for a potential prosecution.
What happens next? Do they always go to jail right away?
Not always.
Yeah.
For less serious stuff, the police might issue a desk appearance ticket, a deed. That lets the person go home with a court date.
Okay.
But for more serious crimes, like the felonies Hemphill's charged with, or if someone doesn't qualify for a date, they go to central booking for more processing. And pretty early on, an assistant district attorney, an ADA, starts reviewing the case, talking to the arresting officer.
So the DA's office gets involved quickly.
Yes, that early ADA involvement is key in figuring out the next steps.
Our source also talks about the ADA in the complaint room. What's their role there?
So they dig into the facts from the police, maybe talk to the complainant, other witnesses. Their job is to decide if there's actually enough evidence to formally charge the person and what charges fit.
And they write up the official complaint.
Yep, the formal document. It has to lay out facts showing reasonable cause, basically, enough evidence to believe the person committed the offenses. But, crucially, the DA's office can also decide not to prosecute if they think the evidence just isn't there. It's an important check.
Okay, so if they do file charges, what's the next step in court?
That's the arraignment, usually within 24 hours of the arrest. It happens in criminal court.
And what happens at arraignment?
The defendant is officially told the charges. The judge decides on bail, like in Hemphill's case, where the decision was no bail.
Right, a key moment.
The defendant also gets various legal notices about the grand jury possibility, any statements they made, witness IDs, that kind of thing. It's their first formal court appearance.
The DA info also breaks down the different types of charges in New York. Can you quickly run through that?
Sure. You've got violations the least serious, not technically crimes. Then misdemeanors, less serious crimes, Class A or B. And then felonies, the most serious, Class A down to E.
And predatory sexual assault, the main charge here.
That's a felony, a serious one. Means potential prison time over a year. Understanding that hierarchy just puts the gravity of Hemphill's charges into context.
Okay. And finally, the grand jury. How does that fit in for felony cases?
In New York, unless the defendant waives it, all felony cases have to go to a grand jury. It's a panel of citizens.
Like you see on TV?
Pretty much, yeah. They hear the prosecutor's evidence and decide if there's enough there to issue an indictment. Yeah. That's the formal accusation saying, okay, there's enough evidence for a trial.
And if they indict?
Then the case moves up to the New York State Supreme Court. That's where the arraignment on the indictment happens and where Hemphill eventually pleaded not guilty. The grand jury is basically a safeguard, making sure there's a solid basis before forcing someone through a full felony trial.
Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, let's shift gears now to something that feels, initially at least, totally different. Private equity and gun stores.
Yeah, this research paper we found, it's looking into whether private equity investment in gun retail chains has any connection to violent crime rates. This is where we start thinking about those broader implications.
It's definitely an unexpected angle. How did they even study this?
It's pretty detailed research.
Yeah.
They compared gun stores with private equity investment against similar stores without it. They tried to match them, same county, same year, to control for local factors.
Okay. And the data source?
They use crime gun trace data from Pennsylvania. This data lets them link guns found at crime scenes back to the specific licensed dealer who sold them, the retail chain, and even the investors behind the chain.
So they can actually track the flow of guns used in crimes back to PE-backed stores versus others.
Pretty much, yeah. It allows for a fairly direct comparison of the impact of PE ownership.
And what did they find? Was there a difference?
Yeah. Pretty striking findings, actually. The data suggested that the PE-backed gun stores sold significantly more guns that were later traced to violent crimes. Homicides, assaults, robberies, compared to the non-PE stores.
Wow. More crime guns coming from PE-backed shops.
They also found these PE-backed stores were less likely to get inspected by the ATF, that's the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives.
Less oversight.
Apparently.
Yeah.
And they were more likely to see an increase in gun law violations after the PE investment.
So, more crime guns, fewer inspections, more violations. That doesn't sound good.
No, it points to a potential correlation between PE involvement and, well, guns from those stores ending up used in crimes more often. The lower inspection and higher violation rates definitely raise questions about oversight and compliance when PE takes over. Maybe priorities shift.
Did the paper suggest why this might be happening? What's the theory?
They propose it might link back to the typical PE playbook. Aggressive cost-cutting, maybe? Or really strong focus on boosting sales volume.
Pushing sales numbers.
Right. And maybe that involves selling more of those cheaper budget guns, which the research suggests are often the types favored by people who commit crimes later on.
Interesting.
They even found guns from PE-backed dealers had a shorter time to crime.
Meaning?
Meaning the guns were recovered at crime scenes faster after being sold. That can be an indicator of illegal trafficking, like straw purchases, where someone buys a gun for someone else who can't legally buy one.
So the business model itself, cost-cutting, sales focus, might inadvertently make it easier for guns to get into the wrong hands.
That's the argument they're making. The shorter time to crime is particularly worrying, suggesting a quicker pipeline from legal sale to illegal use, maybe less careful sales practices.
Did they find anything else linking PE and manufacturers?
Yeah, interestingly, they found that PU firms that already had investments or professional ties to gun manufacturers saw an even bigger increase in crime gun sales when they invested in retail chains.
So those existing connections within the industry seem to amplify the effect.
It suggests those links might create advantages, maybe better supply chains, better pricing that push sales volume even higher, potentially including the types of guns more likely to be misused.
Okay, and what about enforcement? If violations went up, did more stores lose their licenses?
That's the kicker. Despite finding more violations at PE-backed stores, the researchers didn't find they were more likely to have their licenses revoked. In fact, they were less likely to be inspected after the PE investment.
But less likely to be inspected even with more violations? That seems backward.
Right. The researchers argue that this mix, the cost-cutting, the sales pressure, and potentially weaker enforcement, could create fertile ground for guns ending up where they shouldn't be. It really highlights this potential gap where maybe the risk increases, but the oversight doesn't keep up.
It raises big questions about whether regulations are effective when powerful financial players get involved in sensitive industries like this. If the main goal becomes maximizing profit, are the safeguards strong enough?
That seems to be the core concern raised by the research.
Okay, so let's try to bring this back together. We have the Hemphill case, the specific, horrific allegations, and we have this research on PE in the gun industry. How do we connect these thematically? They seem so different on the surface.
Well, I think the underlying link, maybe, is about the exercise of power, particularly financial power, and what happens when there's potentially a disregard for the harm caused to others.
Okay, explain that more.
In the Hemphill case, you have allegations of an individual using wealth, status, his professional background, to allegedly intimidate, control, and inflict terrible harm. It's power used abusively on a personal level.
Right.
In the gun retail study, you have financial entities, private equity firms, pursuing profit maximization, and the data suggests a correlation with a negative societal outcome: increased gun violence. It's financial power potentially leading to broader harm, maybe unintentionally, maybe through negligence, maybe through prioritizing profit over potential consequences.
So both scenarios involve power, individual or corporate financial power, allegedly being wielded in ways that cause harm and raise questions about accountability and oversight.
Exactly. It's about the ethical considerations that should come with financial power, whether it's an individual's wealth or a corporation's investment strategy. How do financial motivations impact behavior, corporate practices, and ultimately other people's lives?
So putting it all together, we've looked at these deeply disturbing allegations against Ryan Hemphill, got a sense of how the Manhattan justice system starts to respond, and then explored this research suggesting financial motives in the gun industry, specifically involving private equity, might link to increased violent crime.
Yeah, we've seen alleged power abuse on a shocking individual scale. And then we've considered research hinting at how financial drivers in a whole industry might contribute to serious societal problems. It really shows how individual actions, the legal system, and these big financial forces can intersect in complex and sometimes really damaging ways.
It definitely gives you that multifaceted view we were aiming for. You know, connecting the dots between the alleged violence against individuals and these bigger potential systemic issues tied to finance and regulation. Hopefully that gives you, the listener, that deeper understanding you asked for.
And it leaves us with a pretty big question for you to think about, doesn't it? The Hemphill case details are, well, they're uniquely awful. But does this other research, the gun retail stuff, suggest we should be looking much more closely at the potential ripple effects of private equity and maybe other big financial players across all sorts of industries, not just their economic impact, but their societal impact?
Yeah, what kind of checks and balances actually work to prevent abuses of power, whether it's one person allegedly acting monstrously or large corporate systems driven mainly by the bottom line?
What kind of oversight is truly effective?
Definitely gives us something to chew on. And look, this deep dive is really just scratching the surface. We'd encourage you to keep an eye on the Hemphill case as it develops, obviously, but also maybe dig into the ongoing debates around gun regulation and the growing scrutiny of private equity's role in everything from healthcare to housing.
What other connections are out there between the world of finance and issues of safety, justice, and just, well, human impact we're thinking about?
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.